our piece of work, our scoping study, was really a response to the findings of the 2015 Food Futures Innovation Cluster Project, which identified workforce, labour and skills as a really critical issue facing the Goulburn Valley fruit industry going forward. And in the report of that project, they said that the attraction and retention of people in horticulture requires many ingredients, including a greater understanding of the system by which people are attracted, developed and retained. So I want you to think about that word system, which I'll come back to in a moment. And we need to understand this system in order to have the capacity to plan and act at regional and industry scale. So the title of today's forum is about solutions. Lisa and I aren't going to present the solutions. Our job is to provide more information to inform the discussion at the table that we hope will start to develop some of those solutions. So we're pointing to solutions, we're not offering them. So this idea of workforce development as a system really is that there are a whole lot of things that are going on that influence the availability of people and the skills of those people for filling jobs in your businesses. Often the first thing we jump to is thinking about skills. If we haven't got people with the right skills, then it's all about, it's the training sector's fault. We need better training courses and we need more people in those training courses. But research in other agricultural sectors and in other industries makes it very clear that workforce development is about a lot more than skills. Critically, it's also about workplace and job attractiveness. So are we offering jobs that people actually want to step into and work in? And that's about HRM practices within businesses. Job attractiveness is also partly about career paths. People want to come into an industry knowing that there are places for them to go within that industry. So the availability and visibility of career paths is an essential part of workforce development. And the availability of career paths is influenced by what else is going on in businesses, and workforce development is also influenced by what happens in the world of policy, particularly things like training policy and visa and migration policy, as we've heard. That's a huge canvas, and our scoping study obviously wasn't able to compile comprehensive information across all those pieces of the puzzle. Most particularly, Lisa and I focused on this the skills piece and the career paths piece. So we wanted to understand more about the kinds of jobs that are available in fruit industry businesses and the skills that those people need and how they acquire them. And we wanted to understand a little bit more about the kind of career paths that are available. A really critical limitation of our study is that we only spoke to employers. We did not interview any employees in the industry. So we don't know much yet about the attractiveness of the jobs that are on offer from the employee's perspective. So summarising, our aim was to improve our understanding of the types of jobs that exist in fruit industry businesses, and we call that workforce structure. And I'll be talking mostly about that, and then Lisa will go on to talk about how employers approach the task of meeting their workforce needs and some of the issues and barriers that they're facing. And the aim of all that is to inform your ability as industry stakeholders to figure out some things that you might be able to do together to address the needs. What Lisa and I did was a desktop analysis of existing documents and existing data, and then the main part of our work was 27 semi-structured interviews. 25 of those were with employers within the industry here in the Goulburn Valley, and 2 with other stakeholders. Those employer interviews, 20 of those were with people who grow fruit and or store and pack fruit, and another 5 were with employers elsewhere on the supply chain, because we wanted to get a bit of an idea about whether there are career paths that go backwards and forwards between the growing sector of the industry and the other sectors of the supply chain. What do we already know about workforce in the fruit industry? Well, we know from the industry roadmap that orchards are changing and therefore workforce is changing. Orchards are getting larger, they're getting more intensive, they're adopting new technologies, and they're targeting new markets that require higher specifications of product, and all that has implications for the kinds of workers and the skills that you need in those workers. And that really fed through into the Innovation Cluster Project, which identified middle management as a really critical human resource need in the industry. The other thing we already know is that this is not a problem that is unique to the Goulburn Valley or to horticulture. In fact, it's a common problem across all agriculture, where we're seeing entry-level manual operator type jobs being replaced by mechanisation, and we're seeing a growing demand for semi-skilled or paraprofessional roles, which is what we might call in the fruit industry middle management. This is a diagram from a 2015 environmental scan of the industry. And so other industries and other agricultural sectors are planning and acting strategically around this workforce change, and that's what we'll be hearing about in the panel discussion after the next break. We also do know a little bit about the people working fruit growing in the Goulburn Valley from the census. The most recent available census data is from 2011, and that tells us that there are 941 people working in fruit growing in the Goulburn Valley. The problem with the census is it happens at one point in time, and it happens in August, which of course is a low point in the orchard seasonal calendar. And the question asks people where they worked in the week prior to the census. And so it isn't actually that much use to us knowing who was working in the fruit industry in the first week of August. Nevertheless, there are some findings from that census data in our report about income levels, education levels, and hours of work. And the census data does tell us that there are significant numbers of people working in the industry in permanent positions and in management positions. On to our interviews. So as I mentioned, we carried out 25 interviews with fruit growers and or packers, as well as some other people in the supply chain. With our orchard interviews, we did try and cover a spectrum of orchard sizes, but with more emphasis on larger orchards because those are the orchards that have a larger permanent workforce. As you'd expect in those interviews, we found a fair bit of variation in the way that people organise their orchard workforce and in the kinds of positions that they have and in the titles that they give to those positions. But by looking at the duties and responsibilities associated with positions, we were able to come up with a relatively common set of typical position titles that seem to describe the range of jobs in the fruit growing part of the industry, ranging from the owner manager and general manager jobs down through orchard manager, orchard leading hands, who are often also called supervisors, and down to orchard hands. The orchard manager job is a really interesting one. It had the most variation in what that job is across different businesses. So someone who's called an orchard manager can actually have quite a different job in different orchards, and that's probably an interesting thing to think about. And we were able to get a bit of a picture about the typical tasks or duties that attach to those different levels of positions within orchards. And a critical thing to think about there is that this depends a great deal on the size of the orchard. And it won't surprise any of you to hear that on smaller orchards, the owner manager does pretty much everything. And it's as the orchards get larger that you tend to get levels of positions below the owner manager taking on different tasks. So that's one element of thinking about workforce structure. What are the typical jobs in the industry and what do those jobs do? And that then links onto the skills that those jobs need. The other piece of this work was to look across our small sample of interviewees and to see whether there were typical ways that the workforce was organised on orchards of different sizes and different types. And that is the case. We were able to identify 4 broad types of orchard workforce organisation based on orchard size. Starting from the smaller orchards under 50 hectares, which tend to be owner manager and their family, only with seasonal labour, no permanent employees. There was a category of small to medium orchards in that 50 to 70 hectare range, which typically have one or a couple of permanent orchard hand type positions. There is a category of orchards in this size range of 100 to 200 hectares, which tend to have a small permanent staff, 2 or 3 positions. And it was really these orchards, which are type 3 in our typology, where people were starting to talk about a need for an additional level of management. As the owner managers in orchards of those size are saying there's just too much for us to do. We need somebody under us to look after the orchard hands and to look after some management activities. And now type 4, we identified with the large orchards, and also this includes people that store and pack fruit for others as well as their own fruit, which tend to have this more hierarchical structure with business divisions and managers at the heads of those different divisions. So what this typology helps us to do is to start thinking more clearly about what is this need for middle managers? Who are these people? How many of them might we need, and where and what kind of businesses employ them? And we think that it's really these people. It's really that additional management role that people are seeing a need for in those medium orchards, plus it's those leading hand and orchard manager roles in those larger businesses. And I suppose the thing to think about here is that over time we would expect more orchards to be growing into this kind of size category. And that's, I guess, where we're seeing that's where we're seeing this growing demand for that orchard manager type position. So I'm going to hand over to Lisa. She's going to talk more about the career paths part of the story and about the recruitment experiences of the people that we interviewed.
So I'm going to first talk a bit about the experiences the employers had that we interviewed with how they recruited staff to the businesses. And we found that employers used a mix of internal and external recruitment. And by internal recruitment, we mean that they were building the skills of their existing workforce to take on these new roles. Employers described a benefit of this being that they actually already knew the candidate for the position. There are going to be no nasty surprises. They know what they're getting. And also the candidate already knew about the business. And we can't emphasize enough how much employers valued the subjective and specific knowledge about the business as an important factor in deciding when to try to get people internally as opposed to bringing in from the outside. But employers also did externally recruit, which means bring new people into the business. And they tended to do this for entry-level positions or where the position relied on a skill set not available or that couldn't easily be built within their existing workforce. And larger businesses tended to recruit externally more often, which makes sense. They have a lot more positions that they're trying to fill, so they're using that more often. And they tended to use a range of either local recruitment, national, or international, a real mix there. An interesting finding was that the orchard and integrated businesses tended to actually focus less on qualifications, and they were much more focused on somebody having agricultural or horticultural skills and experience in the industry. So they might be looking for somebody with a certificate type level qualification, but they weren't necessarily looking for bachelor's degrees. This is a bit different than for the other businesses in the supply chain. So those sort of like farm advisory, chemical distribution companies, research companies, those sort of businesses. We tended to say that a bachelor's degree seemed to be the new sort of entry-level position in those types of businesses. So in a nutshell, when it comes to recruiting, employers tended to prefer internal recruitment, but where there's new skills that are going to be needed to bring into the business or they can't build it internally, that they have to then recruit externally. We also asked employers about their experience, whether or not in the last 12 months if they had recruited for any positions and whether or not they were planning on recruiting for any positions in the next 12 months. And 14 of the employers we interviewed said that yes, they were recruiting, and they were recruiting for more than 27 positions overall, and this list gives you an idea of all the different types of positions they were looking to fill, or had looked to fill recently. An important point here is actually the positions that were hard to fill. So 11 employers identified that they had some positions that were hard to fill, and there were a couple of employers who said they actually were always seeking new people because of turnover in the business. Just meant they were always looking for new people to take on roles. And an important point here is that if you look at those positions, orchard manager, assistant orchard manager, shade manager, marketing manager, dispatch manager, other manager, agronomist, nurseryman, specialist pruners, most of those have the word manager in their title. So this aligns really nicely with the previous work that was focusing on the idea that mid-level management type roles are difficult to fill. And the challenge here is that problems accessing staff can actually impede businesses and what they want to achieve. Like you can't achieve the profitability and productivity that you want for your business if you don't have the staff there to do that. And there were a couple of interviewees who actually described that they had stalled in their growth for their business because they couldn't do what they needed to do because they didn't have the staff to do it. And that's a problem. Another thing we wanted to find out was whether or not people use position descriptions, and that's because a position description is often seen as a tool to help understand, like, between the employer and prospective employees, to negotiate and understand what the expectations are for the role and conditions and pay and things like that. And we thought it might be a useful tool to think about for the Golden Valley fruit industry. And what we found was that there was actually a range of experiences with whether or not people use position descriptions. And remember the typology of different business types. Type 4, which are the larger businesses, which with many more staff, they tended to see they perceived a benefit associated with using position descriptions, as you can see there, because they all either use some or all positions had position descriptions. And these are the businesses that have more defined sets of tasks associated with roles. And these businesses also, some of the reasons people liked them had to do with it help manage expectations for roles, as well as giving employees ownership over their positions. Some of the smaller businesses, so with a broader and fluctuating set of tasks needed for their business, for each role, may not actually perceive a benefit with using position descriptions. And you can see that with the number of businesses that don't use position descriptions at all. And one of the concerns that was raised is that it sort of limits the flexibility needed for positions. And again, that makes sense. Smaller businesses, smaller number of people needed to do more things and needing to have the flexibility to take on a more variety of tasks. So we can take the workforce structure stuff that Michael was talking about, along with the experiences with recruitment, and Michael and I sort of identified that there were two broad types of jobs in the horticulture industry, and these are just simply described as sort of the doer jobs, the people who go out and do the day-to-day operational work, or supervise people doing the day-to-day operational work and doing documentation of that work. And then the other sort of jobs are the decider jobs. Those are the people who tend to do the planning, deciding, coordinating, supervising, and documenting. So the top group of type of jobs are where the managerial jobs sit. Now, an important point here is that the orchard manager role, if you see, is sort of sitting right on the line of the doer and decider. And that is important because that's where the messiness comes in that job, because they tend to actually do a mix of doing and deciding type tasks, and it can differ depending on the type of business. So if you're a type 4 farm or type 4 orcharding business, they tended to have more defined, discrete tasks, so there might actually be more of an actual decider position, whereas a type 3 business, which might just have a smaller number of staff needing to do more things, they might have to have much more doing within their role. So an important point here then is that making sure there's really clear expectations when you're trying to seek somebody from an external recruitment, making sure you're really clear about how much doing is going to be needed for that kind of role to sort of reduce some of the tension. So while we found there were two broad types of jobs, we also found that there are two broad types of career paths. And one is the doer career path, and the other is the decider career path. And they have slightly different entry pathways. Both can be entered through family connections, but the managerial or the decider career path can also come from somebody from a similar role or related field, graduates, trainees, word of mouth, headhunting, and poaching. While the doer career path also comes from external recruitment, labor hire, word of mouth recruitment. So an important point here is that somebody going along this doer career path is going to be building up their skills and moving through positions that are actually reinforcing the doing. They're getting really good at doing operational things for the business. And somebody in a decider career path is going to be focusing on increasing their skills through time that are about being a good decider, being a good manager. So they're very different sets of skills at those two levels. And if you notice here in the middle, there's that sort of dashed line indicating the idea of moving from doing to deciding career paths. And we think this is really important because employers described a real preference for internal recruitment. And if you're going to be internally recruiting, there needs to be a way to then, how do you take people from those sort of doer career paths and give them the skills they need so that they can actually shift up into a decider role. And that's a challenge. So an important point then, when we're looking at that way of thinking about career paths and managing for the workforce you need, is this idea of strategic workforce planning. And strategic workforce planning is basically this idea that the employer needs to be thinking about what's going to be happening in the industry in the near future, what things are going to be changing, what technologies are going to be emerging, what are going to be the workforce needs for the business in the future. And that's going to be really important if they're going to be internally recruiting, so they need to build the skill set of people internally, or even if they're bringing in people from the outside, they need to be able to access people who are going to be able to do those things. So while that's a very important thing, and there definitely are businesses that we interviewed where the employer was thinking that way and was actually using strategic workforce planning and in their decision making, there's actually a limited ability of an individual business to do this. Especially the smaller businesses, small workforce, what's needed to be able to make these sort of decisions as a long-term strategy is limited. So that means that we need to be thinking about something more collectively beyond the business level. So Michael and I identified it in the report, which are on the table. You're welcome to have a copy. So 4 broad areas of potential industry collaboration, and these are just, as Michael said at the beginning, these are some ideas from our research that hopefully you can take and table discussions and build on them and come up with some ideas that will be worthwhile for the industry. The first idea was developing a collective understanding of the common jobs, pay scales, and associated position descriptions in the industry. And this is not implying trying to make every individual business take up position descriptions. This is about having a discussion about what the different ranges are within different job titles within the industry and pay scales and things. Developing targeted linkages with the training sector. This has got two broad parts. So this is about the VET as well as university sector. This is about how do we get industry to influence the type of content that's going on in the training sector. And this is also about how do we connect students and trainees into industries that have actually got more applied direct knowledge in farms or in the businesses themselves. We've also identified a potential to establish a regional industry approach to enhance the availability of career paths for managerial roles. The managerial roles are clearly an issue, so something needs to be done, and it's going to have to be beyond the individual farm business scale. And finally, we've identified that some industry-directed environmental scanning and research might be really useful. So that includes data gathering about things like current workforce demand and supply, and sort of what changes might be coming on the horizon.